I was standing in my driveway on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning in Henderson, Nevada, when I watched three people climb out of a white sedan emblazoned with Sunset Ridge HOA on the side. The woman leading the charge had that distinct haircut, the one that screams, "I need to speak to your manager," and I knew immediately that my peaceful morning was about to become anything but peaceful. "Quinton Winters?" she called out, marching toward me with a clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield. "That's me," I replied, setting down my coffee mug on the porch railing. "What can I do for you?" "I'm Brenda Morrison, president of the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association. We need to discuss the illegal structure on your property." She gestured dramatically toward the back of my lot, where my guest house stood, the same guest house that had been there since I bought the property 3 years ago. I felt my stomach tighten. "Illegal structure? Are you talking about my guest house?" "Yes, Mr. Winters. That building violates our community guidelines. It exceeds the permitted square footage for accessory structures, and according to our records, you never submitted plans for approval before construction." I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. "That's because I didn't build it. The guest house was here when I purchased the property in 2023. It was built in 1987. Brenda's eyes narrowed. "Be that as it may, it still violates current HOA regulations. We've been conducting an audit of all properties in Sunset Ridge, and yours came up as non-compliant. You have 30 days to remove the structure, or we'll take legal action." "Hold on," I said, raising my hand. "You can't just demand I tear down a building that's been here for almost 40 years. That's insane." One of the men behind Brenda, a thin guy with round glasses, chimed in. "The HOA covenants were updated in 2020. All structures must comply with current regulations, regardless of when they were built." "That's not how grandfathering works," I shot back. "If a structure predates the regulations, it's typically protected." Brenda's smile was cold. "Not according to our legal counsel. You'll be receiving an official notice in the mail. Good day, Mr. Winters." They turned and walked back to their vehicle, leaving me standing there in disbelief. I picked up my phone and immediately called my real estate attorney, Marcus Chen, who I'd worked with during the property purchase. "Marcus, I need your help. The HOA is trying to make me demolish my guest house." After explaining the situation, Marcus was silent for a moment. "Quinton, do you have the original permits for that guest house?" "I should. Everything was disclosed during the sale. The seller gave me a packet with all the historical documents about the property." "Find those documents. If that guest house has a valid grandfathered permit, the HOA doesn't have a leg to stand on. They can't force you to remove a legally permitted structure just because they changed their rules decades later." I spent the rest of that afternoon digging through my filing cabinet. The property documents were organized, thankfully, and I found what I was looking for in a manila envelope labeled Guest House Records. Inside were the original building permits from 1987 issued by Clark County, along with inspection records and a certificate of occupancy. Everything was legitimate, signed, sealed, and documented. I made copies of everything and called Marcus back. "I've got it all. Original permits, inspections, the works." "Perfect. Scan those and send them to me. I'll draft a response to the HOA. Don't worry, Quinton, you're in good legal standing here." The official notice from the HOA arrived 3 days later, certified mail. It was even more aggressive than Brenda's verbal warning, threatening daily fines starting at $100 per day if I didn't submit a demolition plan within 30 days. The letter also mentioned that failure to comply could result in the HOA placing a lien on my property. I immediately forwarded it to Marcus, who responded with his own letter to the HOA, attaching copies of the grandfathered permits and citing Nevada state law regarding non-conforming structures. His letter was professional but firm, essentially telling the HOA to back off. For about 2 weeks, I heard nothing. I started to think maybe they'd realized their mistake and decided to drop the matter. I should have known better. On a Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. I threw on clothes and rushed outside to find a demolition crew in my backyard, a small excavator already positioning itself near my guest house. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, running toward them. A man in a hard hat turned toward me. "HOA ordered us to remove this structure. You got a problem? Take it up with them." "Stop right now! You don't have permission to be on my property." The man shrugged, Lady from the HOA said she had authorization. She's right over there. I turned and saw Brenda standing near the property line, arms crossed, watching with satisfaction. I stormed over to her, my blood boiling. You can't do this. This is my property. The HOA has the authority to remedy violations when homeowners refuse to comply, she said smugly. It's in the covenants you agreed to when you purchased here. I'm in full compliance. That guest house has a grandfathered permit. My attorney already sent you documentation. We reviewed your so-called permits and determined they're insufficient. The structure still violates current standards. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. If she wanted to play hardball, so could I. Henderson Police, what's your emergency? I have trespassers on my property attempting to demolish my building without permission. I need officers here immediately. Brenda's confidence faltered slightly. You're calling the police? This is HOA business. This is criminal trespassing and destruction of property. That makes it police business. 2 patrol cars arrived within 10 minutes. I explained the situation to the officers, showing them the permits and Marcus's letter to the HOA. Brenda tried to argue that the HOA had legal authority, but the officers weren't buying it. Madam, regardless of your HOA rules, you can't order the destruction of someone's property without a court order, one officer explained. This is a civil matter that needs to be settled in court. If this crew continues, we'll have to cite them for criminal trespassing and potentially cite you for conspiracy to commit property damage. The demolition crew didn't need to be told twice. They packed up and left within minutes. Brenda stood there fuming, her face red with anger and embarrassment. This isn't over, Mr. Winters. The HOA will take you to court and you'll end up paying for all the legal fees when you lose. Looking forward to it, I replied coldly. After they left, I called Marcus and told him what had happened. He was furious. They tried to demolish your property without a court order? That's outrageous. Quinton, I think we need to go on the offensive here. We should file for an injunction to prevent any further harassment. And honestly, you might have grounds for a lawsuit against the HOA for attempted property destruction. Do it, I said without hesitation. I'm done playing defense. Marcus filed an emergency motion the following Monday, seeking a temporary restraining order against the HOA. The hearing was scheduled for later that week. In the meantime, I installed security cameras around my property, particularly focused on the guest house. I wasn't taking any chances. The hearing took place in a small courtroom at the Clark County Courthouse. Judge Patricia Reynolds, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, presided. Marcus presented our case, laying out the grandfathered permits, the HOA's threats, and the attempted demolition. The HOA's attorney, a slick-looking guy named Robert Crane, argued that the covenants gave the HOA broad authority to enforce compliance and that my permits were questionable in validity. Judge Reynolds cut him off. Counselor, these are official county permits from 1987. Are you suggesting the county issued fraudulent permits? No, Your Honor, but the standards have changed since then. That's exactly what grandfathering provisions are for, the judge said, flipping through the documents. Mr. Winters' guest house was legally permitted and built in compliance with regulations at the time. The fact that the HOA later changed their rules doesn't invalidate a pre-existing legal structure. She looked up at Brenda, who was sitting at the defendant's table. Ms. Morrison, did you actually order a demolition crew to Mr. Winters' property without a court order? Brenda shifted uncomfortably. The HOA believed we had the authority to remedy the violation. You believed wrong. What you did could be construed as attempted destruction of property, which is a crime. Judge Reynolds shook her head. I'm granting the temporary restraining order. The HOA is prohibited from taking any action regarding Mr. Winters' guest house pending resolution of this matter. Furthermore, I'm ordering a full hearing on this issue in 60 days. If I find that the HOA acted in bad faith, there will be consequences. We walked out of that courtroom with a victory, but Marcus warned me it was just the beginning. They're going to fight this. HOAs can be incredibly stubborn, especially when they're proven wrong. They'll spend thousands in legal fees rather than admit they made a mistake. He was right. Over the next 2 months, the HOA's attorney filed multiple motions, trying different angles to attack my grandfathered permit. They claimed the guest house had been modified since 1987, which would void the original permit. They brought in their own inspector who wrote a report claiming the structure was unsafe. They even tried to argue that my property had been annexed into the HOA after 1987, so the original permits predated the HOA's authority. Marcus methodically demolished each argument. We had photographs from the property listing in 2023 showing the guest house was virtually unchanged from the original plans. We hired our own structural engineer who certified the building was sound and safe. We pulled property records proving my lot had been part of the HOA governed area since 1988, meaning the guest house predated even the HOA's establishment in my neighborhood. The full hearing finally arrived in late summer. The courtroom was more crowded this time. Several of my neighbors showed up, some supporting me, others apparently siding with the HOA. I recognized a few faces from neighborhood barbecues and block parties. Judge Reynolds had clearly done her homework. She started the hearing by addressing both attorneys. I've reviewed all the filings in this case. Before we proceed, I want to understand the HOA's endgame here. Mr. Crane, why is your client so insistent on removing this particular structure? Robert Crane stood. Your Honor, the HOA board believes that allowing exceptions to the covenants undermines the integrity of the community standards. If Mr. Winters can maintain an oversized accessory structure, other homeowners will demand similar exceptions. But this isn't an exception, the judge said. This is a legally grandfathered structure. It existed before your rules. The board believes that all properties should be brought into compliance with current standards. Judge Reynolds leaned back in her chair. Let me be clear about something. HOAs have authority granted to them by state law and their recorded covenants. They don't have unlimited power to override existing legal rights. Mr. Winters has presented overwhelming evidence that his guest house is a legally permitted, grandfathered structure. Your client's desire for uniformity doesn't trump established property rights. She looked at the documents in front of her. Moreover, I'm troubled by the HOA's conduct in this matter. Attempting to demolish Mr. Winters' property without a court order was reckless and potentially criminal. Ms. Morrison, would you like to explain your reasoning for that decision? Brenda stood up, clearly uncomfortable being called out directly. Your Honor, I was advised by a previous legal counsel that we had the authority to take direct action for covenant violations. What previous legal counsel? The judge asked sharply. A lawyer named Dennis Hart who did some work for the HOA last year. Judge Reynolds looked at Robert Crane. Mr. Crane, are you aware of this advice? Crane looked embarrassed. Your Honor, I was not retained until after the demolition incident. I have no knowledge of what Mr. Hart may have advised. I see. The judge made some notes. Well, that advice was completely incorrect. Ms. Morrison, you're lucky Mr. Winters called the police when he did. If that crew had actually damaged his property, you and the HOA could be facing criminal charges, not just a civil lawsuit. She spent the next hour questioning both sides, reviewing the permits, examining the structural engineer reports, and clarifying the property's history. It became increasingly clear which way she was leaning. Finally, she rendered her decision. I find that Mr. Winters' guest house is a legally permitted grandfathered structure that predates the relevant HOA covenants. The HOA has no authority to demand its removal or modification. The temporary restraining order is made permanent. The HOA is permanently enjoined from taking any action against Mr. Winters regarding this structure. Marcus and I exchanged relieved looks, but the judge wasn't done. Furthermore, I'm awarding Mr. Winters' attorney's fees and costs in this matter. The HOA's actions were unreasonable and lacked legal basis. The amount will be determined at a later hearing, but counsel should be prepared to submit detailed billing records. After the hearing, several neighbors approached me outside the courthouse. One of them, an older man named George who lived 3 houses down, shook my hand. Good for you, Quinton. That HOA has gotten too big for their britches. They tried to fine me $500 last year because my mailbox was the wrong shade of black. I'm glad someone finally stood up to them. But not everyone was happy. A woman named Patricia, who served on the HOA board, glared at me. You've set a terrible precedent. Now everyone is going to think they can ignore the rules. I didn't ignore any rules, I replied calmly. I have a legal structure with valid permits. There's a difference. Over the next few weeks, I waited for the attorney's fees hearing. Marcus submitted a detailed accounting of his time. Between the initial response, the emergency injunction, the countless motions, and the full hearing, he'd invested over 80 hours in my case. His bill came to nearly $30,000. The HOA tried to argue the fees were excessive, but Judge Reynolds disagreed. Mr. Winters was forced to defend his clear legal rights against a baseless attack. The HOA's stubbornness in pursuing this case despite overwhelming evidence caused these fees to accrue. The award stands at $30,000, payable within 60 days. I thought that would be the end of it. The HOA would pay the fees, I'd keep my guest house, and life would return to normal. I was wrong. About a month after the final judgment, I received a letter from the HOA announcing a special assessment of $500 per household to cover unexpected legal expenses. The letter didn't mention my case specifically, but the timing was obvious. They were making all the homeowners pay for their failed attempt to take down my guest house. The neighborhood exploded. My phone rang constantly with angry neighbors demanding to know what happened. I explained the situation repeatedly, showing people copies of my permits and the court's ruling. Most understood and were angry at the HOA, not me. But a few blamed me for causing trouble. A special HOA meeting was called, and I attended along with about 70 other homeowners, a massive turnout for our neighborhood of 200 homes. The community center was packed, people standing along the walls. Brenda called the meeting to order, trying to maintain control. We're here to discuss the special assessment necessitated by recent legal expenses. You mean the lawsuit you lost against Quinton Winters? Someone shouted from the back. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Brenda's face flushed. The board acted in good faith to enforce community standards. By trying to illegally demolish his building, George called out, I was at the courthouse. The judge said you were wrong. The meeting devolved into chaos. People demanded Brenda's resignation. Others called for a vote to remove the entire board. Several homeowners pointed out that the HOA had wasted community funds on a pointless legal battle instead of fixing the neighborhood's aging playground equipment or repairing the community pool's cracked tile. I stood up, and someone noticed. Let Quinton speak. The room quieted. I hadn't planned to say anything, but I felt I owed my neighbors an explanation. I didn't want any of this, I began. I bought my house 3 years ago, and everything was disclosed properly. The guest house was legally built with proper permits in 1987. When the HOA demanded I tear it down, I showed them the permits. They refused to listen. When they sent a demolition crew to my property without my permission or a court order, I called the police and my attorney. I didn't have a choice. Why were they even targeting your guest house? Someone asked. Yeah, I honestly don't know, I admitted. It's been there for almost 40 years. It's not visible from the street. It doesn't affect anyone else's property values. I use it when family visits. I've never caused problems in the neighborhood. Brenda tried to interject. The structure violates current size restrictions. But it's grandfathered, multiple people shouted. George stood up. I move that we vote no confidence in the current board and hold immediate elections for new leadership. Second, several people called out. The vote was overwhelming. Brenda and 3 other board members were removed that night. Temporary replacements were elected, including George, who became interim president. One of his first acts was to announce a full audit of HOA finances and legal expenses. What that audit revealed was shocking. Over the past 3 years, the HOA had spent over $200,000 on legal fees, most of it pursuing petty covenant enforcement actions against homeowners. Brenda had been writing checks to Robert Crane's law firm for things like threatening letters over minor paint color variations, basketball hoops left in driveways, and holiday decorations displayed past HOA mandated dates. George brought the findings to the next monthly meeting, which was even more packed than the special meeting. Our HOA has been spending an average of $67,000 a year on legal fees. That's more than we spend on landscaping, pool maintenance, and playground upkeep combined. And for what? To harass our neighbors over trivial matters. The room erupted in angry conversations. One woman stood up. Brenda threatened to fine me because my Halloween decorations were still up on November 2nd. She said they had to be down by November 1st. I ignored her and nothing happened. Was she planning to sue me? Based on these records, quite possibly, George replied. There are at least 15 homeowners who've received legal threats in the past 3 years. This is insane, someone else said. We're supposed to be a community, not a police state. The new board immediately implemented reforms. They voted to adopt a more lenient enforcement policy, focusing only on genuine violations that affected property values or safety. They also established a requirement that any legal action must be approved by a majority vote of homeowners, not just the board. As for Brenda, she'd gone quiet after being removed from the board. But I'd heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was furious and threatening legal action of her own against the HOA for wrongful removal. Then, things took a strange turn. About 2 weeks after the audit was released, I got a call from George. "Quinton, we've discovered something disturbing. Can you come to my house?" I walked down the street to George's place. He let me in and led me to his dining room table, which was covered in financial documents. "Iteu. The new treasurer has been doing a deep dive into the HOA accounts," George explained. "We found irregularities. Money that should be in the reserve fund isn't there. Checks written to vendors that we can't verify actually did any work." "Are you saying someone's been embezzling?" "We're not sure yet, but it looks suspicious. There's about $45,000 we can't account for over the past 2 years. My stomach sank. "What are you going to do?" "We're hiring a forensic accountant. If someone's been stealing from the HOA, we're going to find out who and press charges." The forensic accountant's report came back 6 weeks later. The findings were damning. Brenda Morrison had been writing checks to fake vendors, companies that didn't exist, and depositing the money into a personal account. She'd also been padding legal bills, claiming the HOA owed Crane's law firm more than they actually did, then pocketing the difference. Total theft. Nearly $53,000 over 2.5 years. George called me with the news. "We're meeting with the Henderson Police Department tomorrow. The accountant says this is clear-cut embezzlement. We have to press charges." "Does Brenda know you've discovered this?" "Not yet. The detective asked us to keep it quiet until they can interview her." 2 days later, I was working in my home office when I saw police cars pull up to Brenda's house 4 doors down from mine. I watched from my window as officers knocked on her door. Brenda answered, and after a brief conversation, she was handcuffed and placed in the back of a patrol car. The neighborhood WhatsApp group exploded with messages and speculation. George posted an official statement an hour later, explaining that Brenda had been arrested for embezzlement and that the HOA was cooperating fully with law enforcement. The local news picked up the story that evening. "Henderson HOA president arrested for embezzlement" ran on 3 different stations. The reports detailed the charges and mentioned that Brenda had allegedly stolen over $50,000 from the Homeowners Association she'd been elected to lead. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated. Brenda had made my life hell, tried to destroy my property, and cost me thousands in legal fees, all while stealing from our community. But another part of me just felt sad. This was our neighborhood, a place where kids played in the streets and neighbors waved to each other. Brenda had poisoned that with her authoritarian enforcement and her greed. The criminal case moved forward over the next several months. Brenda initially pleaded not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. The forensic accountant testified, showing the paper trail of fake vendors and forged documents. Bank records proved she'd deposited HOA checks into personal accounts. Robert Crane, the HOA attorney, testified that many of the legal bills Brenda claimed to have paid were inflated or completely fabricated. Faced with the mountain of evidence, Brenda eventually took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to embezzlement and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with credit for time served. She was also ordered to pay full restitution of $53,000, though everyone knew she'd never be able to pay that much. The civil side of things wrapped up too. The HOA paid my attorney's fees as ordered by the court. I received a formal letter from the new board apologizing for the previous board's actions and confirming that my guest house was recognized as a legally grandfathered structure with no restrictions or compliance issues. Life in Sunset Ridge slowly returned to normal, or at least a new normal. The new HOA board was much more reasonable, focusing on maintaining common areas and addressing legitimate safety concerns rather than nitpicking every tiny covenant violation. The neighborhood started feeling like a community again. I kept my security cameras up, though, just in case. One afternoon in early spring, about a year after the whole ordeal started, I was sitting on my back patio with my brother, Derek, who was visiting from Seattle, and we were having coffee and watching his kids play in the yard. "So, this is the famous guest house that caused all the trouble," Derek said, looking at the small building at the back of my property. "That's the one. 800 square feet of perfectly legal, grandfathered, completely legitimate guest house. It's crazy that they tried to tear it down. Looking back, I think Brenda was targeting me specifically. I never figured out why, but she seemed to have it out for me from the start. Maybe she just needed someone to bully, and I was convenient. Or maybe she was trying to distract from her embezzling by creating drama over petty stuff," Derek suggested. "Could be. I'll probably never know the real reason." Derek's daughter, my niece Emma, ran up to us. "Uncle Quinton, can we stay in the guest house tonight? It's so cool." "Of course you can. That's what it's there for." As Emma ran off to tell her brother the good news, Derek smiled. "Imagine if Brenda had gotten her way. You wouldn't be able to have us stay here comfortably. Yeah, we'd all be crammed in the main house. This is so much better for everyone." That evening, as I was grilling dinner for my family, George stopped by with his wife. They'd become good friends over the past year, bonded by the shared experience of fighting back against HOA overreach. "We're having a neighborhood barbecue next month," George said. "Big celebration. New playground equipment is being installed, the pool renovation is done, and we actually have money in the reserve fund for the first time in years." "Sounds great. Count me in." "You know, Quinton, what you did, standing up to Brenda and the old board, it changed this neighborhood for the better. A lot of people were afraid to speak up. You showed everyone that you can fight back against bullies, even when they hide behind rules and authority." "I just wanted to keep my guest house," I said with a laugh. "I wasn't trying to start a revolution." Sometimes that's how revolutions start, one person standing up for what's right. After they left, I thought about everything that had happened: the threatening letters, the attempted demolition, the legal battles, the discovery of embezzlement, and finally, justice being served. It had been exhausting and stressful, but in the end, right had prevailed. The guest house stood exactly as it had for nearly 40 years, a testament to the fact that property rights mean something, that you can't just bulldoze over people's legitimate claims because you want conformity. My grandfathered permit had been worth fighting for, and I'd do it again if I had to. But as I stood there in my backyard, watching my niece and nephew run around laughing, the lights of the guest house glowing warmly in the evening, I hoped I'd never have to fight that battle again. Some victories, no matter how necessary, take a toll. The neighborhood barbecue a month later was exactly what Sunset Ridge needed. Over 100 people showed up, filling the community center's outdoor area with laughter, conversation, and the smell of grilled food. Kids played on the brand new playground equipment while adults mingled and caught up. George gave a short speech thanking everyone for their patience during the transition and promising that the new board would be transparent and accountable. He also acknowledged the difficult year the community had been through. "We learned some hard lessons," he said. "We learned that we need to stay engaged with our HOA, ask questions, and hold our leadership accountable. We also learned that our community is full of good people who care about doing the right thing. I'm proud to be part of Sunset Ridge, and I'm excited about our future." People applauded, and someone started a chant, "Best HOA, best HOA." It was tongue-in-cheek, but there was real enthusiasm behind it. We'd been through something difficult together and come out stronger. Later that evening, as things were winding down, a woman I didn't recognize approached me. She was probably in her early 40s, professional-looking, carrying a notepad. "Mr. Winters, I'm Jennifer Torres, a reporter with the Las Vegas Review-Journal. I've been covering HOA issues in the Valley, and I'd love to interview you about your experience." I hesitated. "I don't know. It's all behind us now." "That's exactly why your story is important. You won. Most people who fight HOAs either give up or lose. Your case shows that homeowners can successfully defend their rights. I think it would be valuable for others to hear about it." After thinking it over, I agreed. We scheduled an interview for the following week at my house. Jennifer was thorough, asking about every detail of the case, from Brenda's initial visit to the final resolution. She took photos of the guest house and the grandfathered permits. The article ran 2 weeks later as a full-page feature in the Sunday paper. Henderson homeowner wins David versus Goliath battle against HOA. It told the entire story, including Brenda's embezzlement and arrest. The article sparked a broader conversation about HOA accountability and the need for reform in Nevada's HOA laws. I started getting emails and calls from people across the Las Vegas Valley who were fighting their own HOA battles. Some wanted advice, others just wanted to share their stories. I wasn't an expert, but I tried to help where I could, mostly by recommending good attorneys and encouraging people to document everything. One case particularly stood out. A couple in Summerlin was being threatened with fines because they'd installed solar panels without HOA approval. Nevada law actually prohibited HOAs from unreasonably restricting solar installations, but their HOA was trying to do it anyway. I connected them with Marcus Chen, and last I heard, they were winning their case. It felt good to help others, to turn my frustrating experience into something positive. I'd never wanted to be an HOA activist, but I'd become one by necessity. Meanwhile, life went on. I continued working my job as a software engineer, mostly remote, which made the guest house even more valuable. I'd converted part of it into a home office, a quiet space away from the main house where I could focus on coding without distractions. My girlfriend, Sophie Jefferson, moved in with me about 18 months after the HOA drama concluded. She'd been supportive throughout the ordeal, though we hadn't been dating long when it started. Now, as we settled into life together, the guest house became a place for her art studio. Sophie was a painter, and the natural light in the guest house was perfect for her work. "You know what's funny?" she said one afternoon as she worked on a canvas. "This building that caused so much trouble has become such an important part of our lives. I can't imagine not having this space." "That's exactly why I fought for it," I replied. "It wasn't about winning an argument with the HOA. It was about preserving something valuable and useful. This guest house makes our property special." The neighborhood continued to thrive under the new HOA leadership. Common areas were well maintained, events brought people together, and the authoritarian enforcement of petty rules was replaced with common sense and community spirit. Property values actually increased, proving that draconian HOA enforcement wasn't necessary for a desirable neighborhood. George served 2 terms as HOA president before stepping down, satisfied that he'd helped steer the community in a better direction. His replacement, a retired teacher named Alice Chen, continued the reformed approach. The neighborhood had learned its lesson about giving too much unchecked power to HOA boards. As for Brenda Morrison, I never saw her again after her arrest. She served her sentence at a minimum security facility and was released after about 20 months with good behavior. I heard she moved out of state, probably seeking a fresh start away from the scandal. I didn't wish her ill, but I didn't have any sympathy either. She'd abused her position, stolen from her neighbors, and tried to destroy my property. Justice had been served. The legal precedent from my case actually ended up being cited in other Nevada HOA disputes. Marcus told me that at least 3 other cases had referenced Judge Reynolds's ruling about grandfathered structures and HOA authority. My fight had created case law that would protect other homeowners. "You should feel good about that," Marcus said during one of our occasional lunches. "A lot of people are going to benefit from your willingness to stand up for your rights." "I just hope it makes HOAs think twice before trying to bully homeowners," I said. "There are plenty of legitimate reasons for HOAs to exist, but they need to exercise their authority reasonably." Agreed. Unfortunately, some HOA boards attract people who like having power over others. That's when you get problems. Sophie and I got married 2 years after she moved in. We held the ceremony in our backyard, with the guest house serving as a staging area for the bridal party. About 60 friends and family attended, including several of our neighbors. George gave a toast at the reception, joking that the guest house had brought our community together in unexpected ways. "To Quinton and Sophie," he said, raising his glass, "and to the most famous guest house in Henderson, Nevada, may it stand for another 40 years. Everyone laughed and cheered. It was a perfect moment, surrounded by people we cared about, celebrating not just our marriage but also the journey we'd been through. Later that night, after the guests had left and we were cleaning up, Sophie and I stood looking at the guest house, its windows glowing warmly in the darkness. "Do you ever regret buying this property?" she asked. "All the drama you had to deal with?" I thought about it for a moment. No, this is home. And honestly, as horrible as it was at the time, I'm glad I went through it. I learned a lot about standing up for myself, about community, about how important it is to fight for what's right, even when it's difficult. "Plus, you got me out of it," she said with a smile, leaning into me. "That's definitely the best outcome." The years that followed were peaceful. The HOA functioned as it should, maintaining common areas and handling legitimate community issues without overreach. No one tried to take my guest house again. We hosted family visits, Sophie painted in her studio, and I worked in my office space. The building that had caused so much controversy became simply what it always should have been, a useful, valuable part of our home. I occasionally thought about those tense days when demolition crews showed up in my backyard, when I watched Brenda march toward my house with her clipboard and her authoritarian attitude. It seemed almost surreal now, like something that had happened to someone else, but the security cameras were still there, a reminder that the battle had been real. One afternoon, about 5 years after everything had settled, I was working in the guest house when I heard a knock on the door. I opened it to find a young couple standing there nervously. "Hi, I'm sorry to bother you," the man said. "We're thinking about buying a house in this neighborhood, and our realtor mentioned you had some trouble with the HOA years ago. We wanted to ask you about it before we commit to purchasing here." I invited them in and told them the whole story, not sugarcoating anything but also explaining how the neighborhood had changed since then. "So you'd recommend living here now?" the woman asked. "Absolutely. The current HOA is reasonable and responsive. The neighborhood is great, the people are friendly, and honestly, what happened to me led to positive changes. Just make sure you stay engaged with the HOA, attend meetings occasionally, and don't let the board operate without oversight." They thanked me and left, apparently satisfied. I hoped they'd buy in the neighborhood. We could always use good neighbors. That evening, I told Sophie about the conversation. "It's weird being the neighborhood legend," I said. "The guy who fought the HOA and won." "You're pretty legendary," she teased. "My hero, defender of guest houses everywhere. I just didn't want anyone messing with our property. And that's what made you heroic. You stood up for what was yours." As we sat on the patio watching the sunset, I reflected on how much had changed since that Tuesday morning when Brenda first showed up with her threats and her clipboard. My hair had a bit more gray now, the neighborhood had new leadership, and I'd gotten married. But the guest house stood unchanged, exactly as it had been built in 1987, with its legal grandfathered permit protecting it from anyone who might try to challenge its existence again. The experience had taught me valuable lessons about property rights, about the importance of documentation, about standing firm when you know you're right. It had also shown me the best and worst of community living, the worst in Brenda's corruption and authoritarian enforcement, the best in neighbors who came together to demand accountability and create positive change. I'd kept every document from the case in a fireproof safe. The original permits, the court rulings, the correspondence, everything. Not because I expected to need them again, but because they represented something important. They were proof that individual rights matter, that you can fight powerful institutions and win if you're in the right, and that communities can heal and improve after being damaged by bad leadership. The guest house would outlast all of us. Long after I was gone, it would still be standing there, serving whatever future owners would use it for. Maybe they'd never know about the battle that was fought to preserve it, or maybe the story would become neighborhood lore, passed down through generations of residents. Either way, it would remain, a testament to the fact that sometimes the right thing to do is to stand your ground and fight. As darkness fell and the lights in the guest house came on automatically, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This was home, truly and completely. I'd fought for it, defended it, and won the right to enjoy it in peace. No HOA board, no matter how aggressive or unreasonable, could take that away from me. Sophie came outside carrying 2 glasses of wine. She handed me one and sat down beside me. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, just reflecting on everything, how far we've come, how lucky we are. We are lucky. We have a beautiful home, a wonderful neighborhood, and a legally grandfathered guest house that no one can ever take away. We clinked glasses and drank, watching as lights came on in houses throughout the neighborhood. Somewhere out there, George was probably reading on his porch. Alice was likely reviewing HOA business for the next board meeting. Young families were putting kids to bed, retirees were settling in for the evening, and life continued its normal rhythm. This was what community was supposed to be. People living their lives, respecting each other's property and rights, working together when necessary, but otherwise just being good neighbors. The nightmare of Brenda's reign had ended, replaced by something healthier and more sustainable. I never wanted to be the person who fought an HOA. I never wanted that drama or stress or conflict. But when it came down to it, when someone tried to take what was legally mine, I'd found the strength to fight back. And in doing so, I'd not only saved my guest house, but helped transform an entire neighborhood for the better. That was worth celebrating, worth remembering, and worth the battle it had taken to achieve. The guest house stood as a symbol of that victory, 800 square feet of vindication and justice. And every time I looked at it, I felt proud of what I'd accomplished. The story could have ended differently. I could have backed down when Brenda first threatened me, demolished the guest house to avoid conflict, or accepted the HOA's unreasonable demands. But I'd chosen to fight, armed with documentation, legal precedent, and the knowledge that I was right. That choice had made all the difference. As Sophie and I finished our wine and headed inside for the night, I took one last look at the guest house. Tomorrow my parents would arrive for a week-long visit, staying in that very building. They'd sleep comfortably, enjoy their privacy, and probably never think about the battle that had been fought to preserve their accommodations. That was fine with me. The story didn't need to be retold constantly. It was enough that justice had been served, rights had been protected, and community had been restored. The guest house would continue serving its purpose exactly as it had for decades, exactly as it should for decades to come. And if anyone ever challenged it again, they'd find the same thing Brenda Morrison had found, a homeowner with documentation, determination, and the law on his side. My grandfathered permit wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a shield, a guarantee, and a promise that some rights couldn't be taken away no matter how hard someone tried. I locked up the main house, set the security system, and went to bed with Sophie, content in the knowledge that our home was secure, our rights were protected, and our future was bright. The battle with the HOA had been one of the most stressful experiences of my life, but surviving it had made me stronger, more confident, and more appreciative of what I had. The guest house lights continued glowing through the night, a beacon of persistence and victory in the quiet Henderson suburb. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but tonight, everything was exactly as it should be. Home was safe, community was strong, and justice had prevailed. That was all anyone could really ask for.